The Republic of Armenia is home to about 3,200,000 people. More than one-third of these people live in the capital city of Yerevan. According to the 2005 World Bank report entitled Natural Disasters Hotspot, a Global Risk Analysis, Armenia is among the most natural disaster-prone countries in the world. Over 80% of Armenians are exposed to multiple natural disasters. Every year, these disasters cause huge economic losses. Earthquakes, landslides, floods, and mud flows are the most dangerous. Developing countries like Armenia, already struggling with widespread social problems, are particularly vulnerable when natural disasters strike because their resources are already scarce. This is the conundrum of natural disaster risk management. Countries that can least afford to invest in preventing and managing risks end up suffering the most. Earthquakes are among the most severe natural hazards that Armenians face because the country is situated on a seismically active crescent that stretches from the Alps through the Caucasus and Central Asia to Russia. The high risk is due to the interaction of several tectonic plates. In 1988, the Spitak earthquake, with a magnitude of 7 on the Richter scale, killed 25,000 people, injured 19,000, and destroyed 515,000 homes. Even now, some 20 years later, Armenia is still recovering from the devastation of the Spitak earthquake, and significant investment is still needed to rebuild the disaster zone. In the city of Gyumri, every single citizen lost at least one family member to the earthquake. Anahit Galoyan lived through the earthquake, but she claims that many survivors are still unable to come to grips with the trauma of this huge disaster. The earthquake took my older brother and his entire family, my mother and my younger brother. My father was outside when it happened. He rushed over, and as he approached, he could see no buildings. 9-story buildings were all but gone, leveled to the ground and turned into small hills. My mother had gathered all 5 family members under the entrance arch because she believed it had always saved lives during earthquakes. Guess what? It turned out to be the worst place. 3 heavy slabs fell down there, trapping all of them underneath. In 1988, there were no functioning rescue teams in the Soviet Union. It was as though no disasters could happen under the communist regime. Instead, the powerful civil defense machine was designed only for fending off nuclear attacks from adversaries. This huge system had plenty of plans on paper, but in fact was incapable of responding effectively. When the Soviet state collapsed, newly independent Armenia was left alone to deal with a devastated country and all of its problems. Then came war, an influx of refugees, and a severe economic crisis. At the time, experts visiting from France referred to Armenia as a disaster laboratory. In their opinion, there was no need to conduct disaster research in any other country, since Armenia was home to all types of natural disasters. In fact, destructive earthquakes and their historical consequences on Armenian soil are well documented as early as the 6th century BC in the cuneiform inscriptions of Argishti II, king of Urartu, up to the 19th century Armenian chroniclers. All 12 capital cities of Armenia have suffered earthquakes, and some have been completely destroyed. Despite this extensive history of natural disasters, it was only after the Spitak earthquake that Armenia recognized the urgent need to advance risk mitigation and emergency management, the need for specialized organizations to study the history of disasters, to assess the risks and develop effective plans for prevention, and to mitigate the consequences. In 1991, Armenia established the National Survey for Seismic Protection and Directorate for Emergency Situations. In 2008, these two agencies, plus the Technical Safety Center, Department of Reserves, Armenian State Hydrometeorology and Anti-Hail Service, were incorporated in the newly formed Ministry of Emergency Situations.
This work, among other things, includes strategic plans that have already been developed and submitted to the government. That's about 14 programs in various domains. Another integral component of our strategy is the international cooperation and the understanding that we are ready to share acquired knowledge and skills with other countries. In other words, we believe this work cuts across borders, nations, and religions. Our strategic approach recognizes a globalized world and the need for regional cooperation.
The key lesson learned from the Spitak earthquake was the critical need to reassess the previously underestimated seismic hazard and mitigate seismic risks accordingly. Following the earthquake, an extensive complement of activities was undertaken to reassess the seismic hazard, and new national seismic codes were developed. In addition to reevaluating the seismic hazards and revising inadequate codes, another lesson learned was the need to enhance construction quality and address existing malpractice in operating apartment buildings and other structures. Many buildings' earthquake resistance was compromised by tenants, who habitually tampered with load-bearing elements, modifying the footings, damaging and reducing the capacity of bearing walls, expanding basements, and building illegal additions. Since both the authorities and ordinary citizens must be prepared to cope with disasters, response plans and disaster risk management strategies need to be developed. Some experts contend that a timely and efficient disaster response to the Spitak earthquake could have saved more than 7,000 lives. Now Armenia has prepared a national seismic zone map that indicates earthquake intensity probabilities across regions. These maps, that are approved by the Ministry of Urban Development, are used for laying out city master plans. Throughout the country, about 150 seismic stations help Armenian specialists monitor the seismic settings of the region.
While in many other countries only seismic events are monitored, our monitoring network stations keep track of around 40 geochemical, geophysical, and hydrodynamic parameters.
Serious work has been done by the Armenian Rescue Service. Plans for protecting people from strong earthquakes and geoinformation systems have been developed.
We have good rescue teams. They have participated in rescue missions in Turkey, Pakistan, and Georgia. The teams are undergoing additional training to enable Armenia to join the International Search and Rescue Advisory Group, the INSARAG.
Earthquake-resistant construction is key to mitigating seismic risk, according to Charles Francis Richter, the creator of the Richter magnitude scale. He advocated investing in seismic-resistant construction rather than sinking time and resources into earthquake prediction. He was once quoted as saying, "I think that harping on prediction is something between a will-o'-the-wisp and a red herring. Attention is thereby diverted away from positive measures to eliminate earthquake risk." Armenia's construction codes were revised after the Spitak earthquake. In 1995, national standards for earthquake-resistant construction were adopted. And in 2006, these were supplemented by more rigorous construction quality assurance standards. The most recent revision included almost a dozen amendments, including engineering standards for applying seismic isolation systems.
The earthquake-resistant construction codes are primarily for designing new buildings, although some chapters address reconstruction and include explicit provisions for strengthening and retrofitting buildings and measures to be taken to strengthen damaged structures. Armenia's number one problem now is retrofitting apartment blocks that were built before 1989 so that they conform with the newly established seismic hazard level. In Gyumri, there are 88 apartment buildings in third-degree emergency state that undoubtedly need strengthening. The situation is much worse in Yerevan, where 4,000 apartment buildings need strengthening over time.
In 1999, the Armenian government approved a comprehensive program for seismic risk mitigation that was developed by the National Survey for Seismic Protection. The estimated cost of the program was $4 billion at that time, of which 70% was earmarked for retrofitting buildings. However, implementation was delayed due to lack of funds. In Armenia, the application of seismic isolation technologies is closely associated with Professor Mikhail Melkumyan, a member of the Anti-Seismic System International Society and chairman of the Armenian Association for Earthquake Engineering. Armenian technologies for seismic isolation make it possible to separate the building from its foundation and achieve seismic isolation without evacuating the tenants. This characteristic distinguishes Armenian technologies from similar technologies applied elsewhere in the world. In fact, Professor Mikhail Melkumyan achieved the first-ever installation of seismic isolation systems in a residential building and in a school, without interrupting their normal operation. The advantage of this method, other than ensuring earthquake safety, is in its very cost-effectiveness and simplicity of use.
Seismic isolation may be applied both at the foundation and roof level. These technologies enhance the earthquake resistance of buildings without interfering with their operation. What is seismic isolation? It means isolating the building from the earth crust oscillations and installing the so-called seismic isolators between the building and its foundation. So what happens during an earthquake? The earth crust moves and the wave, the energy that rises up to the building, is partly absorbed in the seismic isolation plane and partially reflected back to the crust. That energy does not reach the building.
4 plants in Armenia now manufacture laminated rubber steel bearings, not only for domestic market demand, but also for export. These laminated rubber steel bearings cost much less and meanwhile match the quality of the foreign analogs. Seismic isolation of buildings is both more reliable and less expensive than conventional methods used to strengthen the main structures.
The World Bank helped us start using these technologies. The first buildings were retrofitted under the framework of the Earthquake Zone Reconstruction Program, funded by a World Bank loan. Then, the Swiss Caritas used this technology to strengthen a school. Tufenkian Hospitality that builds hotels, an elite group, a developer, increased the application of the technology in Yerevan. Here, you see Huntsman's neighborhood, where several buildings have been placed on rubber steel bearings. People in these buildings do not feel weaker shocks, say 5 to 6 on the Richter scale, whereas people in nearby buildings with no bearings would rush out of their homes as they feel their shocks.
Professor James Kelly, a leading expert on seismic isolation systems and one of the worldwide originators of the technology, during his visit to Armenia in 1997, offered high praise for the works being performed in this country.
My purpose of my visit is to see this innovative form of earthquake-resistant construction for new buildings. I'm very impressed by this construction project. I think it represents a very, very innovative way of solving the problem of retrofit and seismic upgrade of existing dwelling houses. And it's also, as far as I know, the first of its kind in the world, and represents a very significant step forward. And there's a credit to the Armenian engineers who've carried out this project.
To date, there are 32 buildings constructed and strengthened with this technology, including schools, healthcare institutions, business centers, and multi-apartment blocks. Nevertheless, thousands of buildings erected prior to 1995 are a disaster waiting to happen because they were designed and constructed based on under-assessed seismic hazards. The dimensions of this problem are multiplied because over 40% of Armenia's population and 70% of its economic and industrial capacity are concentrated in the capital city of Yerevan. Will available funds ever be sufficient to retrofit these buildings, or at least to begin the process of retrofitting with priority public buildings such as schools and hospitals?
The best thing governments can do is to get prepared by taking proactive measures that minimize the potential loss from natural disasters, potential economic costs and costs in terms of human lives. The second thing they can do is to get ready to respond immediately and effectively when disasters happen. And the third thing that governments can do is to get ready to reconstruct by mobilizing human and financial resources so as to achieve an effective recovery after the natural disaster. Now, the World Bank can help the government along those three lines, and I have to say that the World Bank has experience in working in Armenia in disaster risk mitigation. And one important option there is to identify and prioritize key infrastructure and key buildings that would need to be strengthened so as to better resist. The World Bank also can help in financing the strengthening of key buildings and infrastructure so that they can resist the impact of earthquakes and other disasters. And we are very pleased that the study that has been undertaken recently in order to assess the country's preparedness to address natural disasters is about to be completed. And we hope that this study will serve as, will provide good support in order to design a comprehensive natural disaster mitigation strategy in Armenia.
Landslides are common among the disasters that threaten Armenia. Around 3,000 landslide sites occupy some 65,000 hectares. Every year, over 100 landslides destroy settlements, railways, motor vehicle roads, orchards, and arable lands. landslides are often described as small, local-scale earthquakes. However, unlike earthquakes, landslides can be predicted, and in some cases even prevented. For example, the ՀԱՅԱՍՏԱՆ landslide could have been prevented, but it wasn't done. During the 1970s, the now defunct Հրազդան-Իջևան Railroad was constructed. A motor vehicle bypass road was built around the village of ՀԱՅԱՍՏԱN on the mountain slope parallel to the railroad. This bypass road triggered more than 30 landslide sites, and some 10 hectares of land plunged down the mountain slope. The railway and the road were destroyed, and the Աղետներ riverbed became so obstructed that the river burst its banks and water engulfed villagers' homes.
I've got to show you this. This used to be Mardun Աղաջանյան's orchard. That stump in the middle of the river was his walnut tree. He used to breed bull calves. Fortunately, we managed to help him get the bulls out of the barn so he can slaughter and sell them. At least he was compensated for some of his losses that way. Over there is where Frontik Harutyunyan used to live. As you see, the river now passes near the foundation of his house. This is my house. Our family of 6 lived here since 1976. The mountain collapsed, blocked the riverbed, and the river flooded our houses, wiping out everything. We all left the house. The rescue team helped save people and their belongings. We suffered huge material losses. Half of the house is gone with the water.
The effects of the ՀԱՅԱՍՏԱN landslide were irreversible. About 30 riverfront households lost their properties, acquired through years of hard work, and were forced to relocate permanently. This used to be our home. When I was a child, I liked the place very much. I played there. Now that it's gone, we're building a new house, and I kind of like it too. But deep in my heart, I like this one better. This was my grandfather's car. He passed away, and the car is left just standing here. And I'm very sad, you know. This used to be our house, and this was our car. The primary cause of landslides in Armenia is human activity. Cutting down the forests, unauthorized construction, and railway and road construction. In the villages of ՀԱՅԱՍՏԱN and Ողջաբերդ, landslides make everything collapse. These villages offer a textbook example of landslide do's and don'ts.
The damage from ՀԱՅԱՍՏԱN landslide has not yet been eliminated. If we had applied engineering protection techniques that are designed for each local landslide, the potential landslide zones could have been stabilized. The European Union Commission highly commended the engineering protection program that we have developed. However, due to lack of funding, these important measures were not taken in a timely manner. And as a result, the active landslide that initially affected 300,000 square meters of land expanded to 2.5 million square meters.
A joint study with the Japan International Cooperation Agency identified 233 settlements in Armenia, of a total of 997 that have been affected by landslides. Landslides have damaged 240 kilometers of motorways of the 7,400-kilometer road network and 5 kilometers of the 800-kilometer railway network. Landslides cause direct social and economic losses of about $55 million annually. If no preventative measures are taken, the annual losses will likely grow to $65 million per year.
I can't recall an instance where we were able to radically address a landslide issue, to counter the negative effects, or slow it down, or eliminate it altogether. Apparently, this is not even possible, but we have to be cautious in our activities to avoid triggering or accelerating landslides. On the other hand, if we must live beside a landslide, then we shall try to more or less coexist in harmony with it.
Armenia's approach to landslides has been scattered and inconsistent. In part, this has been due to a lack of funding for developing comprehensive programs. Armenian experts believe that targeted financing would make it possible to minimize landslide hazards based on available, potential, and developed technologies that are highly regarded by international experts. Floods are a frequent occurrence in Armenia and the cause of substantial economic losses and destruction. Disastrous floods recur every decade. In May 2007, heavy rains caused the river to rise and flood the village of Noramark in the Masis region. Half of the village was underwater. Dozens of households were affected. 2 years later, Marianna Avanesova and her brother Eric Avanesov recall those days. All of a sudden there was water flowing from everywhere, and in 20 minutes it flooded everything. We couldn't do anything. We placed the table in the middle of the living room and with the help of our neighbors put our blankets and mattresses on it so they wouldn't get wet. But we didn't manage to get any clothing or anything else out of the house. Everything went underwater.
In just half an hour, the water got to door level of my car. All I managed to do was get the kids in the car, put the TV set in the car, and drive to my brother-in-law's place. As I got there, my sister called to say that our home was already flooded. There was an empty house in the village, so we lived there for 3 months until the water was gone.
This family of 9 has not yet been able to fully recover their losses from the flood. Not a single thing remained unscathed. There was no crop. Everything was gone.
I had 1 hectare of alfalfa planted that year. Not a single plant was left intact.
Unfortunately, most rural residents do not know about disaster insurance. In turn, the insurance system in Armenia is not perfect and does not work to full capacity either. However, the government partially compensated the losses from this flood.
Yeah, the $500 they gave us, I can't even buy a wardrobe cabinet for that.
These houses were flooded. A tractor came to pick us up. 2 years have passed, but the dampness is still there. This room is not fit for living, and look at the ceiling. It's falling down.
Armenia is a mountainous country. Mountain rivers are known for the floods they bring, while their creeks and gorges generate mud flows. Studies indicate that about 30% of lands in Armenia are in flood-prone and mud-flow hazard-prone areas. Every so often, the precipitation totals run high, and thick layers of snow cover the mountains. In spring, the melting snow and rainfall make the river flow rates exceed their average, say by 10 times. The rivers overflow and flood the near bank areas.
Statistical data indicate that floods and mud flows account for losses of $7 to $8 million each year. There are also indirect losses that are unaccounted for, such as the loss of arable land and the costs for emergency work and rehabilitation.
Not a single year goes by without floods damaging agriculture and cultivated lands. Crops are often lost, roads are seriously damaged, sometimes infrastructure such as bridges and railways are ruined. Another component of flooding is the effect on our water reservoirs and their safety. Driven by the importance of reservoir safety, government has implemented a large investment program with the World Bank aimed at significantly enhancing the safety level of all functioning dams. In addition to technical and engineering upgrades, our dams have been equipped with systems of prevention, early warnings, sound alarms, and other systems which obviously would lead to increased safety and efficiency in reservoir and dam operation.
Natural disasters cost Armenia over $30 million per year. Rural areas suffer the most. Floods, mud flows, and landslides primarily harm agriculture, farming, and livestock. Usually, the government earmarks 5% of the national budget for coping with disaster and emergencies. These funds include compensation for the affected households.
An insurance scheme would be very effective in providing households and businesses the necessary financial means so as to start reconstruction activities. Because usually such disasters put a heavy burden on the budget for reconstruction financing. And that burden can be very heavy. So one possibility there is to have access to contingent credit lines which the government can use so as to mobilize funds immediately.
The need to increase public awareness and preparedness was the most important lesson learned from the Spitak earthquake. Insurance makes people confident that losses will be compensated if a disaster or accident strikes, while awareness inspires confidence that one may prevent or mitigate risks. International experts note that when authorities and citizens are aware and prepared to confront natural disasters, deaths and injuries can be reduced by 40%. This is the vision that guides the Emergency Channel Media Center set up by the Armenian Rescue Service of the Ministry of Emergency Situations.
The rescue service programs are aimed specifically at increasing public awareness and preparedness in communities, various strata of society, and preschools and schools, among others. Another project on disaster prevention measures and increasing awareness is being implemented with the rescue service within the framework of Armenian-German intergovernmental cooperation for northern regions of Armenia, including Lori and Davush provinces. In recent years, they did a good job on public awareness for disasters and emergencies. But the problem lies elsewhere. The problem is that our population, the citizens, are not used to paying attention to that kind of information, even though it is as important as, say, looking out for the weather forecast. I find it quite natural that the media would seek sensational or live news. That's where the true nature of media is. It's hard to expect a constant and consistent interest in public awareness, or that they would follow up on certain cases, study them, and so on. That's where the need comes for special reports, special editions, and special websites that would handle these kinds of detailed and consistent efforts. I feel that little by little, the emergency channel is taking care of these issues.
Բարև ձեզ, հարգելի հեռուստաընկերներ։ Եթերում արտակարգ Ալիք հաղորդաշարի հերթական թողարկումն է։ Այս հաղորդման ընթացքում դուք կգիտեք.
Today, the emergency channel attempts to fill the huge gap in awareness and preparedness, using all of its information channels, through the news agency and websites, radio, television, and weekly newspapers, through a training center, new courses, books, and visual aids. And it also tries to coordinate emergency information management in the media. The government of Armenia does recognize the need for active measures in furthering the disaster risk management agenda. But lack of resources is still an issue. The support and efforts of various stakeholders, including international organizations and donors, NGOs, the private sector, and the scientific community are critical to forming an effective disaster risk management system in the country.
First and foremost, preventive measures have to be boosted. Structures most vulnerable in terms of earthquake resistance and where government attention must be focused should be selected. These are schools, educational institutions, and administrative facilities that have increased roles for emergencies. Systems must be established that would create settings to ensure disaster-induced damage minimization. Another area is forming an insurance framework with its essential role in risk containment. The third area is government actions in the event of disaster. I mean, we've got to have a system in place involving skilled professionals who know how to organize activities during an emergency and understand the government action plan following the disaster and recovery efforts. Of course, the most important directions are preventive measures, preparedness and risk reduction. In that regard, Armenian authorities and the Armenian government will need serious financial and technical assistance.
Natural disasters are a growing threat to sustainable development and poverty reduction. Today, the whole world is convinced that disasters undermine hard-won development gains, destroying lives and livelihoods, and trapping many people in poverty. It is not coincidental that disaster risk reduction is among the priorities included in the 2009 to 2012 Country Partnership Strategy between the World Bank and the Republic of Armenia. With the increasing impact of disasters worldwide, disaster risk management is becoming a crucial component of the national development agenda for Armenia.